Welcome back. So first of all, full disclosure, this is part of our book. So this project is part of our book, the Tiny Kotlin Projects, and it's we're publishing it with CRC Press, Taylor and Francis Group. So check out the link in the bonus lecture if you want to get the book and follow along from there. All right, so let's get started. Therefore, I'm going to create a new project, which I'm going to call Music App UI. Okay, so it will obviously become more than a UI if you want to, but for our purposes here, it's all just about the user interface, because you have learned how to use logic before, and you will learn a little more about logic later on. But this chapter, or today, is really focusing entirely on using Jetpack Compose with user Intel element items. So first things first, let's get rid of our greeting. We don't need that. We're going to start with our projects. All right, let's start with this part here where we have the little icon here inside of our top bar, right? And then we can open up this drawer in which we will have these items. Okay, let's start with the composable for our top bar. So I'm going to put that into a separate file, which will be a file new Kotlin file class. I'm going to put that into UI, and this one will be my composable, which I'm going to call main view. Okay, and I'm going to put it into UI, not in theme, like so. So it will be in the UI folder, not in the theme folder. And then I can go ahead and start with a composable, right? So this is going to be a composable, and I'm going to call this one main view, which is going to contain a bunch of elements. So we need to have the view model later on, the scaffold state, all of that stuff, a bunch of states. We're going to start, however, with our scaffold. Okay, so basically we're going to build the scaffold and then set everything up that we need as we go. So this scaffold, it has content, right? And the scaffold also, well, we get the padding values. So here what we can do is we can just say text and import the text for now. So I'm going to use this material 3 composable, and this text is just going to say text, and it will have a modifier that will be modifier dot padding, and I'm going to use it here. So that's just to get rid of this error. It's not really what I want to have in there, but it's just get rid of this error. So I'm good with that. So now the scaffold has a bunch of properties that we can pass, and that's really where the interesting part comes in. So we have this thing called the top bar, if you recall, right? And the top bar we can define here. So we can obviously also create a separate file just for the top bar, but I'm going to put it in here. I'm going to say it should use the default TopAppBar, which requires a title. So the title will just be a text, which is gonna say home. Okay, for now it's just gonna say home. Later on we want this to be dynamic, but therefore we will need to set up the view model, and I don't want to do that as of now or already. So that's just the title of the top app bar. Let's also import experimental material 3 API, just so this error disappears, and now we can openly or freely add more items to our scaffold. So the top app bar is what I really want to focus on, as I said. And I have the title now. Next, I can set up a navigation icon, and this one will just be an icon button. So an icon that we can actually click on. So that will have a click event, which then should open up the drawer. So this is where we are basically opening the drawer. Open the drawer. Okay, because that's what this button should be. Okay, so this button here, it will be an icon button, and an icon button needs to have an icon as its content. So in here I'm going to put my icon. Now the icon that I want to use is, well, not this icon, but the one with the image vector, this one here, where the image vector will be icons.default. And let's import icons here. Import. Okay, now icons.default.account circle. So that's what this icon is. This little icon is the account circle. And the content description, well, we can write something like account or menu. Okay. Now, once we click on this thing, I want the drawer to open. Therefore, I need scope. So opening a drawer is something, well, it's a suspend function that happens, which is why we need to make sure that we have compose. And we also need something called a scaffold state. As we've seen before, we've used scaffold state, which takes care of the state of the scaffold entirely, basically the content of its of the scaffold, including the top bar and everything, because basically the scaffold is really just the parent UI element or the view for the entire page, which contains the top bar, which contains the content, which contains the bottom bar, and the scaffold state makes sure that it's aware of what each element inside of it is in terms of state. So here I'm going to use the scaffold state, and it will be remember scaffold state is what I want to use here. Now, in my case, scaffold state is not being recognized, and that has to do with a dependency missing. So we can go all the way down here to our dependencies and make sure that we have certain dependencies in here. And I'm just going to put them in here. You can copy this from our project. So just download the project. This line here is overkill. So basically we want to have access to Jetpack Compose with a certain version. And once we sync that, we should be able to see our compose, the scaffold state. Now you see I also added the navigation directly, so the nav version 2.7, and there you see now scaffold allows me, or scaffold state allows me to import it, and also import this scaffold, remember scaffold state function. All right, so these were necessary. Obviously without them I cannot keep going with my UI. So now that we have our scaffold state, let's also create the scope. Okay, so the scope will be a coroutine scope, this one here, which will be a remember coroutine scope. Okay, because as I said, opening and closing the drawer is a coroutine method, or an asynchronous method, a suspend method, suspend function. So now that we have that out of the way, we can open a drawer in here. So this one will be our open drawer launch, where I'm just going to use the scope to launch the following code. I'm going to use the scaffold state and then access the drawer state and say open. So inside of scaffold state, there is this property called drawer state, which you can use in order to open the drawer. All right, now let's use our main view inside of the main activity to be the view to be loaded. So let's import main view from our view folder. So music app UI main view. And now let's test our application to see if we already get our scaffold in the format that I want it to be. So you see we have our text, we have our top bar, and we have our button here, which currently doesn't open the drawer yet. So let's take care of that. Okay, and now let's test the application. We will not be able to open the drawer yet because we don't have any drawer in it yet. So you see, we have our UI, we have the top bar, we have the content of the scaffold, and here's our button that we can click on, the icon button, but it currently doesn't open the drawer because we have not set up the drawer items yet, or like how the drawer should basically be, the drawer content. So that's what we're going to do in the next video.